The turn signals on the 2006 and 2007 Ninja 250 were made with rubber stalks. These are flexible and help reduce damage to the turn signal if the bike is laid down. The problem is that now that these bikes are getting older, the rubber is decomposing and cracking. I've tried gluing them back together with rubber cement, but then they just tear in a new spot. Unfortunately, Kawasaki doesn't sell these rubber stalks by themselves. You have to buy the complete fixture, and it's around 40 bucks. Fortunately, the front rubber stalks are interchangeable. And I'm 99% certain that the rear turn signals use the same rubber stalks as the front. So you could just use the stalks from the rear and then integrate the rears into the taillight. But in my case, I wanted to replace the front OEM turn signals with flush-mounted ones. I found a guy on eBay that was selling Ninja 250 turn signals. This is what I got. Turns out they weren't made for the Ninja 250 and were just generic flush mounts. Not only that, but these are dual filament and the Ninja only uses single filament bulbs. And they simply aren't the right shape to fit in the hole on the Ninja fairing. So I decided to make adapter plates. The rest of this video shows how I made the adapter plates and installed the new flush mounts. So the first thing I did was to unbolt the old turn signals. And then disconnect the wires. At first I thought I would just do this with the front fairing still on the bike, but then I realized it would be a lot easier with the fairing off. I'll start by using an Allen wrench to remove the tank bolts. Then the lower fairing bolts. And finally the front mirrors. With those bolts out and the wires disconnected, the front fairing just pulls off. I'll need a pattern in order to make nice looking adapter plates. The old turn signal makes a good template, but to use it, it has to be disassembled to get the wires out of the way. With that done, I can use it to trace an outline onto the pattern material. I'm using 1/4 inch plywood, but you could also use hardboard or thin MDF. Now I rough cut the pattern. Then finally, I use a belt sander to sand it exactly to the line. Once I have the pattern the exact shape of the blank, I'll need to drill the mounting holes in it for both the fairing and the new flush mount. First I'll trace the fairing holes onto the pattern. Then I use the Signals rubber gasket to trace its holes. With these flush mounts, the front bolt lines up with one of the fairing's existing holes, so I'm going to use that. Now I use an 1/8 inch drill bit to drill pilot holes for all the holes. Starting with the smaller bit makes it easier to put the hole where I want it. Then I drill everything back out with a 1/15 64th inch bit, which is the same size as the original Signals bolts. And finally, I'd need to drill a larger 5/16 inch hole for the wiring. Now I'll check to make sure everything fits right. With everything fitting like it should, I'll go ahead and drill the new holes in the fairing using the pattern as a jig. Now comes the interesting part. I'm going to use my router table to cut the adapter plates using the pattern I just made. The router has a cutter bit with a bearing. The bearing rides on the pattern and the rest of the bit cuts the plexiglass. I start by applying double-sided tape to the pattern and then sticking the plexiglass to it. This is 1/8 inch plexiglass that was recycled from an office display rack. Now if everything is set up correctly, I just push the pattern and plexiglass into the bit and ride it all the way around. That gives me a perfect copy of the pattern. One final thing is that I need to finish the part by drilling holes in it. I start with the big hole for the wiring, then I use the smaller bit to drill only the holes that the new flush mount needs. No other holes should be drilled. Now let's see if it fits. Perfect. All I need to do now is to paint the plates. I'm using gloss black, but only on one side. When I install them later, I will put the unpainted side out. This gives it a cool X-ray gloss effect. I just discovered another problem with the new lights. Turns out the connectors are too big for the Ninja. See how the Ninja uses smaller connectors? I'm going to reduce the diameter of the new connectors by rolling them between two files. With the connectors shrunk to size, I'm ready to test them. Looks like they'll work okay. Now all I have to do is bolt everything back together. I'm using a fender washer, followed by a lock washer, And finally, a nut. Now it's time to reinstall the fairing with the new lights. Just slide it back on, being careful that everything lines up okay. Install the tank fairing bolts with a hand Allen wrench. Never use a power tool to drive the tank bolts. If you do, you will drive the bolt right into your tank and cause a leak. Then do the lower fairing bolts. And finally reinstall the mirror. And of course you'll also want to hook up the wires to the new lights. Now it's time to check to make sure everything works okay. I like to test new motorcycle lights in broad daylight. I've seen too many people selling LED light kits showing them inside a dark garage. But then when you get them and try to use them in daylight, you can't see them. These flush mounts are incandescent. They aren't as bright as I'd like, but they seem to be roughly equivalent to the OEM rears. Well, that's it. I hope you liked the video. At least now I don't have to worry about my turn signals dangling from their wires anymore.